You're either in or you're bowling, and if you're not bowling, then you're really bad, and your coach is probably either out or on the hot seat. We'll pound you with playoff talk and plenty more right now. All right, everyone. This is our second edition, and this should already be your destination for college football talk every Wednesday night. I'm Mark Rogers of Mark Rogers TV, and this is our endeavor, college football, coast to coast, because we know you crave, you love, you want to talk college football each and every week, and we come your way every Wednesday night. You can join me on YouTube. I've got a channel there, Mark Rogers TV. We've got about 3,000 college football videos, talk with coaches, with bloggers, with contributors all across the country, covering every Power 5 conference. We're on Facebook as well. Like me at YouTube or on Facebook, and also follow me on Twitter. We're, of course, going to talk college football playoffs, and that's probably going to be all we're going to talk about basically for the next several weeks as we get set for New Year's Eve. But we also want to talk about some coaching issues and some coaching changes across the country, because it's that time again when the teams that have underachieved are looking for that next guy. And some of those teams that unfortunately have made some great strides with the coach that they have see him go off to greener pastures and a lot more green, period, talking money. And we'll talk about that in just a second. I want to address the college football playoffs because, of course, the selections were made on Sunday, and it's Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and Washington. So I've been asked constantly since then, okay, did the College Football Playoff Committee get it right? Well, I've said from day one in 2014 that their task is basically impossible. And their task is not necessarily to determine the teams that have earned the college football playoff. They are supposed to be selecting what they feel to be the 4 best teams in college football. I've been asked a number of times this week, who are the 4 best teams in college football? So when we're talking 4 best, I'm not talking about the teams that necessarily earned it. Who do I think are the 4 best teams in college football? Alabama. From the week 1 demolition against USC to the SEC championship game and another demolition of a decent football team in Florida, Alabama has rarely been threatened. Ole Miss gave them a run in week 3, but since then, Alabama has pummeled everyone. They're the best football team in America. I don't think there's any question about that. I believe, and this is going to raise some eyebrows, that Michigan is the 2nd best team in college football. They went to Ohio State a couple of weeks ago. They lost in double overtime. They lost on a number of calls, a number of short yardage plays that were measured controversially, we might say. And, of course, the game was on the road. Vegas tells us that that's a 6-point swing. It's 3 points home, 3 points road. They lost fair and square. Ohio State won the game. They earned their way into the playoff. But I believe Michigan, when you look at the body of work, 2nd best team in America. Ohio State, number 3, Clemson, 4. Okay, I make this distinguishing argument, though. Those are the 4, what I believe to be the best teams in the country: Alabama, Michigan, Ohio State, Clemson. But they're not necessarily the 4 that earned it. Alabama earned it. Clemson earned it. They won conference championships. Washington earned it by winning a conference championship and only losing 1 game. Penn State, with the culmination of a 9-game winning streak, defeating a quality team in Wisconsin that's still number 8 in the country, coming back from 28-7 down, they earned it. Those are the 4 teams that should be in the playoff based on resume and earning conference championships. All right, we will talk about this in the offseason. What is the perfect formula for a college football playoff? For me, we forget about half of the FBS format, meaning we've got 128 FBS teams, and we basically count about half of them. So the group of 5 are forgotten. We have seen a tremendous run from P.J. Fleck and his Western Michigan team. They are 13-0. They just won the MAC championship. They beat 2 Big Ten teams, not necessarily the best teams in the Big Ten, but they do have some big out-of-conference wins against the Power 5, Illinois and Northwestern. But is Western Michigan going to get a shot to win a national championship? Well, of course not. Do I believe that they are one of the 4 best teams in the country? Do I believe they're one of the 15 best teams in the country? No. But I have an issue with half of college football, and I'm talking major college football, having absolutely no chance, no shot at winning a national championship. These kids are out there busting their tails all year. They're lifting weights all off season. They're watching film. They're doing everything that they can to prepare to play major college football, risk injury on every play. And basically, their coach could tell them sometime in the middle of August while they're puking out their guts during two-a-days, you know what, kids? You can win every game 50-0, and you know what your shot at is in winning a national championship? Well, it's 0. So I have an issue with that. So in the offseason, once we clear all the games, get past the national championship, start talking some recruiting, we'll also talk about my college football playoff format and what that would look like. 8 teams, 16 teams, group of 5. How do we do it? Well, we'll talk about that at some point. But I did want to shout out to Western Michigan and what they accomplished this year in going 13-0. All right, number of college football coaching changes this week. We just learned that Matt Rhule moves on from Temple, where he was previously offensive coordinator before a 1-year stint in the NFL. Went back to Temple as head coach and has done a tremendous job. So winning at Temple, for you younger football fans who haven't been around for too long, when you see Pat Fitzgerald at Northwestern and you see a David Cutcliffe at Duke actually winning some games, getting to bowl games, and you're not too impressed, go into the record books. There was a time when Northwestern would win 2 games in like 4 years. Duke, the same thing. Temple, it's even more difficult because you don't have the shiny, nice contract and the new football conference to show people and show recruits. But Matt Rhule brought Temple up to a top 25 status the last couple years, and won the American Conference this past season. He moves on to Baylor. Okay, Baylor's been a mess because of recruiting violations and just some indescribable things down there that we've dealt with on our video segments in the past that got one coach fired, and that was deservedly so. But Matt Rhule comes into a situation and you think, okay, hot coaching commodity, why would he take the Baylor job? Well, money, of course, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're all trying to earn a buck, and we usually do take the best offer out there financially. He gets to move on to the Power 5. And also think about the state of the Big 12 competitively right now. Oklahoma is the gold standard by far. Texas has all the resources, all the money, but has been floundering since 2010. It's been a long time since Texas has been relevant. We'll see what Tom Herman can do there. But Matt Rhule at Baylor, with that Texas fertile recruiting ground, can pick up where Art Briles left off and continue to bring in elite quarterback play, elite wide receivers. And if you can play just enough defense, get a couple stops, a couple turnovers on defense in most Big 12 games, you're going to be not just competitive, you're going to vie for the league championship. Matt Rhule was an amazing selection for Baylor. They did extremely well considering what they were coming out of as an institution and as an athletic program in being able to nail that kind of coaching talent. Matt Rhule coming from Temple to Baylor. Okay, Willie Taggart just announced today, moving from South Florida, where he did a tremendous job. They were winning 2 and 3 games before he arrived, and even the administration stuck with him for 2 or 3 years and going 3-9, 2-10. He turned the corner last year, won 8 games, got to a bowl game, gets South Florida to the share of a division championship in the American Conference, and his reward, greener pastures. And if you're an Oregon fan and follow that team and see what they wear most Saturdays, greener pastures means all sorts of neon greens up there in Oregon. Willie Taggart is the new Oregon head coach. Now, it's automatically easy to think he's going to go to Oregon and win. Not necessarily the case, despite what we've seen accomplished by, in particular, Chip Kelly in building a program there at Oregon that went to 2 national championship games in the last 6 years. Oregon is difficult. not many football players up there in Oregon or in the surrounding states. Montana, Idaho, Washington, not a whole lot up there. They got to go to California to get most of its players. So Willie Taggart, he's a player's coach, meaning we hear that in the professional ranks. This is a coach who relates to players, and that's one of the big reasons he turned the program around in South Florida. But he's going to have high expectations at Oregon, and much like Nebraska, not many players in the surrounding states. So it's a difficult job with high expectations, but Willie Taggart may be the guy for that job. Tom Herman moving on from Houston, of course, to Texas. Of course, he had to take that step. It's one of the premier coaching jobs in the country, probably still in the top 5 to 10, despite the issues at Texas in recent years. And that's an extremely tough place to coach. The politics, the expectations are at times just unworldly. To win at Texas, and you have all eyes on you, 27 million population, and you are basically the governor, if not a step above, in Texas. So Tom Herman must win at Texas, or he will suffer the fate, of course, of Charlie Strong, who just lost to Kansas and finished under 500 and was shown the door. Jeff Brom, the new Purdue head coach, takes over for Darrell Hazell, who was dismissed 3 games into the season. And Jeff Brom, of course, coming from Western Kentucky, and his claim to fame, in addition to being part of a football family where they breed quarterbacks and coaches in the Brom family, also did a tremendous job there at Western Kentucky grooming quarterbacks. He's an offensive mind, and that's a good fit. If you can remember back about 10 or 15 years to Joe Tiller, Purdue. Again, there's a theme here. Difficult places to recruit to, but higher expectations. So if you're at Purdue, you're in the Big Ten. You're playing with the big boys, maybe the best conference in college football, and it's difficult to recruit there. So what you need to find the quarterback, and you need to find an offense that's difficult to defend to have a chance. And that's what Joe Tiller was able to do at Purdue. Drew Brees, Kyle Orton, Curtis Painter, NFL quarterbacks he brought to Purdue because he sold them an opportunity to show their wares and get to the NFL, and then he was able to surround them with just enough players to be relevant, win enough games, and keep his job for a long, long time. And so Jeff Brom has that opportunity at Purdue, but it's not going to be easy in a division that features not any elite teams, but a lot of good programs. Nebraska, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Northwestern, Iowa. It's difficult to win the Western Division in the Big Ten with the likes of those programs. Again, not elite programs, not Ohio State, Michigan, but a glut of top 25 type programs that Purdue has to contend with. All right, again, check us out on YouTube. We produce college football videos throughout each week, and of course this is the prime time for college football as we head to bowl season. We've got 3 special guests tonight in our second edition of College Football Coast to Coast. We're waiting on one of our favorites here, and I believe this guy is my first guest going back about 6 years. I worked with him at ESPN. Ben George of Tide 102.9, going to, of course, talk about the Tide and the Alabama matchup against Washington, and really what's special about this Tide team and how he compares it to previous Nick Saban additions from 2009, 11, some of the great Nick Saban teams, 2012, and so forth. All right, I believe we've got Ben on the line. Ben from Tide 102.9. Ben, you probably missed it, but what an illustrious introduction I gave you as what I believe, Ben, you were my first guest way back when.
Is that right?
I believe so. I think you were number one.
It's been a nice ride. I've been following your progress, Mark. This is a pretty awesome setup you got going now. This is pretty cool.
Well, I can't take the credit for it, as you well know. I think you probably connected with my crack director, Marty McPadden, on the way in. So, good stuff. Ben, how you doing tonight?
I love the Christmas tree. I've got the same thing going back here. Very festive. Got that thing up last night. It's found a little time between the SEC championship game now got a little downtime before we got to start getting ready for the playoff run here.
Yeah, and you say that without a smirk on your face, because when it was announced Alabama-Washington, there were some of us that were like, all due credit to Washington, fine football team, will probably produce like 7 NFL players just on defense, but it just doesn't seem like on the surface, on paper, that it's going to be the matchup to challenge this team.
It's hard to pick a spot where Washington will have an advantage over Alabama. I mean, listen, there's going to be a lot of storylines, obviously, now with the latest transfer news of David Cornwell leaving, how the backup situation will shake out. It might still remain the same with Cooper Bateman and Cornwell staying through the playoff, but if they don't, who's behind Jalen Hurts if he gets hurt. But look, Mark, this has been a different type team. This defense is incredible. It seems like this team's at a different level compared to, at least relative to the rest of the college football. And maybe it's not Nick Saban's best team at Alabama per se, but I think the difference between where Alabama is and where the rest of college football, especially in the SEC, I mean, the difference in the SEC right now is very noticeable. I think there's a couple of teams that can play with Alabama, Clemson and Ohio State. I think are the two teams that will give Alabama the most trouble. I think Washington's a good team, but I just think they match up poorly with Alabama, and I think Alabama's going to give them a lot of trouble, especially their offense trying to move the ball. So, look, I mean, anything can happen, and this Alabama team's definitely not unbeatable. But they're heads and shoulders above college football right now.
When you say a bad matchup, Ben, I think you're being a little bit gracious. But I agree. But I don't know who's a good matchup for Alabama. But Michigan State was similar in some respects. I felt that was a bad matchup at the time as well, because they had a pocket passer who wasn't going to threaten the defense outside the pocket in Connor Cook. Michigan State is known to have a running game, but they actually had one of their worst rushing attacks last year, and you have to try to move that Alabama front seven if you possibly can in some way. And so it does set up as an unfavorable matchup for Alabama's opponent, much like it did with Michigan State last year. And probably, again, Michigan State, a fine football team last year, but just not enough athletes everywhere to deal with this team. Is this defense as good as the best that we've seen under Nick Saban, and what would be the comparative points?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, I think this is going to go down as his best. I mean, you look at it and you try to look at the entire 11. Now they've lost Eddie Jackson and Sean Dion Hamilton, 2 starters off this defense, and it seems like they still could match up with any other defense he's fielded. But I mean, you look at who's out there. Most of this defense, Mark, in 3 or 4 years, we might look back and see most of these guys first and second rounders. I mean, I think I made the bold prediction. I don't know if it was on this show or if it was on Tide 1029 early in the year, that I thought my bold prediction for the year was that Alabama's entire secondary would end up being first-round draft picks. That being Minka Fitzpatrick, Marlon Humphrey, Eddie Jackson, and Ronnie Harrison. Marlon's projected there. Eddie's he's a fringe guy right there. But you look at the rest of it. I mean, you got Jonathan Allen. Obviously not everybody on that defensive line will be a top 1 or first or second round draft pick, but those linebackers all could be up high. I mean, you're going to look back on this defense and it's going to measure up with any that he's had. But they do everything so well, and there's not really anything that you can take advantage of. And Nick Saban made that shift from the bigger, stronger defenses to a faster defense, and it's noticeable now. I mean, Reuben Foster, the guy's a lot of fun to watch. Tim Williams coming off the edge. You got a guy like Rashaan Evans who doesn't get a ton of playing time. Now that Hamilton's out, you'll see him and his speed on the field a lot more, but that secondary gets the ball fast. I mean, it's different to watch because these guys, it's hard in space. There is no space, it seems like, when you're playing this defense. I mean, you have to execute just like Florida did on that first drive. You got to execute flawlessly and find your spots and get down the field and take advantage of the scoring opportunities when you have them. That's the biggest thing. You're not going to have a lot of them, but you have to get it in to the end zone, at least come away with points when you have that opportunity.
So you weren't able to sort out whether you made those statements on Tide 1029 or on Mark Rogers TV. I would think when you're on the big stage here on Mark Rogers TV that everything would be locked and loaded. There would certainly be no forgetting what you possibly talked about with me. But That's all right, Ben. We did see the scripted drive from Florida, and it gave a lot of us hope. And I wasn't rooting against Alabama. I wasn't rooting against Alabama. I'm supposed to be an impartial host here. Not rooting against Alabama, but it was like they flipped the switch. It was like Florida had it so well scripted the first drive, and then Alabama kind of figured things out, and that was the end of that.
I've said it a couple of times throughout the year that there are teams, and I said it a little bit ago, that can beat Alabama, but you have to have a really good quarterback. I think that's the starting point, and you have to have a lot of offensive weapons. I mean, we've said it, and when Eddie Jackson got knocked out, hey, how much is this going to hurt the secondary for Alabama? Thankfully that front seven continues to get pressure a lot and doesn't make them cover for a long time. But I've said week in, week out, who can give Alabama any trouble offensively? It wasn't LSU, it wasn't going to be Auburn, wasn't going to be Florida. I mean, Florida showed flashes at times, and then you see Appleby throw behind his receiver about 3 or 4 yards, and it goes for 6 the other way. So there hasn't been that quarterback yet. Browning's a very good quarterback. Will they be able to be effective consistently? That remains to be seen. I think it's the next game when you have, especially Deshaun Watson. I think he's the guy. He gave him trouble last year out in Glendale, and I think he can do it once again. They've got the most talent, I think, to match up with Alabama, because if they get into a shootout, Alabama, that's when you might be a little more concerned, because we've seen Lane Kiffin tries a lot of different things, maybe to the annoyance of many fans and some of his fellow coaches, maybe in that locker room. But I don't know that if Alabama has to score 35, 40 points, that they can against a really good defense. Now, I'll say that, and it seems like every game Alabama scores 30 to 40 points. So what do I know?
Well, that's the conventional wisdom, Ben, that you just hit on, because last year in the championship game, it was Deshaun Watson after a decent Michigan State offense with an NFL quarterback, couldn't get anything done, 0, and Deshaun Watson gives him fits. And then the one weakness that we saw, the one probably span of 2 to 3 quarters that we saw this season was against Ole Miss at Oxford. Chad Kelly, elite receivers. Chad Kelly, not known for his dynamic playmaking ability outside the pocket, but he is an athlete. He can run. He at least keeps the defense honest, and that was the weakness that we saw when Ole Miss pushed him to the limit.
Yeah, and you look at the secondary. That was a question mark coming into the year on the defense. Not the front guys, not the first line guys, but the depth that was in the secondary. And now you've lost Eddie Jackson there, and Tony Brown's having to step up a little more. He made a great play in that Florida game, to make an interception. So he's shown flash. He's got a lot of talent. He's fast. He's a hard hitter, but he's not always in the right position. And Averett's is improved a lot through the year. He's been solid, but Humphrey's even banged up. So that's the true question for me is they don't have a ton of depth back there. So if they're on the field a lot, if they're covering a lot, if they're chasing a lot, can they maintain for 4 quarters if they have to? Now they have, thankfully for them, they have an incredible front seven that changes the game for them, because they don't have to stay back there covering as long, and it makes it a lot easier for them, because the quarterback is rarely throwing it with his feet set and throwing it with time, and that changes everything. But that has been the biggest question for me, is that secondary, and there's only a couple guys that can exploit it.
Ben, I know you got to run. You got some obligations there. I want to hit you with one other thing.
Sure.
You know that I like to dig into conference comparisons and just dig into the depth of conferences. How good is the conference? What can we go on in regards to what they've displayed versus the other conferences? And for the SEC right now, which is getting bashed, I've actually come to the league's defense to a certain extent, because maybe the top 3 to 4 has slipped behind at least this edition of the Big Ten. I don't think this is going to go on year to year, but when you still get down into the 7, 8 range in the seeding of this conference, I still think it's the best. It's just basically, I think there was a perfect storm. Number one, that Alabama's just so much better. So when you're a conference in college football and you're trying to impress the pundits, you almost have to hit the perfect medium. You can't be too deep and too balanced, because then you got a lot of 7 and 5 and 8 and 4 teams, and nobody seems like they're that good. And then you also can't have the one great team and then the rest of the conference bows to that great team, because then it looks like a one-team conference. And that's what the Big Ten's had this year. They've had 4 or 5 rise to the top, basically 4 rise to the top, and it looks really good. But Auburn, Tennessee, Texas A&M, LSU, they all beat each other. So they all finish at 8-4, and it doesn't look very good. But I still have to think with the talent that those teams are going to, that they already recruited, that we saw in the recruiting rankings, that they moved on to the NFL, that if we place those teams in other conferences, there might be a different record on the resume.
Yeah, I think I think SEC's right there. The Big Ten is much improved. Look, there's no question that the top 4 or 5 teams in the Big Ten are legit. But I think top to bottom, we've seen where Vanderbilt is much improved. We saw South Carolina surprisingly look like a competitive team that had an offense that knew how to score points if they needed to. Ole Miss was good early. Obviously, suffered some injuries and they kind of fell apart. But Mississippi State, a team with a really good quarterback that could be dangerous next year. I mean, I think top to bottom, the SEC still is the best team. There's very few teams in the conference. Kentucky, you saw what they did with Louisville. I mean, there's very few teams that is going to be a Rutgers type day where you can go out there and you can pick your score and you're not worried about giving up any points, no matter who they're playing against in the top 5. I mean, that day doesn't happen in the SEC. Now, there is a big drop off from Alabama down to Florida and to Auburn and to LSU. I think LSU played their best game to stay within 10, but otherwise, I mean, every game's a 15 to 20 point game. Now, I think if Alabama played in the Big Ten, it'd be the same thing. I don't know that they'd win. I think there'd be 1 or 2 type matchups depending on if they played Michigan or Ohio State or both. But I think thankfully for Penn State, let's be honest, Mark, let's be thankful that Penn State didn't get the opportunity in the playoff. I don't think it would have gone too well for them. They're better off playing that Rose Bowl game, continue to build their confidence and not end up where Michigan State is this year after the thrashing they took. But in your argument, I do like the Big Ten much better this year.
They were going to be this year's, we'll never know for sure, but I believe Penn State was going to be this year's Michigan State. Idea, Mark. We're on the same, we agree on this one. Penn State would have been this year's Michigan State. Ohio State should have been in that playoff in terms of the best team in the Big Ten, but they didn't earn it. Michigan State earned it.
Well, that's the thing. I think they got the 4 teams right. I just think that it's hard to justify leaving Penn State out based on what they've said in the past and what the criteria should be. It's hard that one loss overrides a conference championship and head-to-head and a team that's playing as good as anybody over the last half of the season.
Ben, you always have the open invite. Always.
I love the new setup. I'm going to be happy to come back and join this anytime.
All right, Ben George, guest number 1, way back. Our friend of the show, always from Tide 102.9. Want to remind you as we prep Joe Lisi for the show here that we've got a number of sponsorships available and a number of offers. So we've got GoDaddy with a number of website, new purchase for domains, 30% off new products. Your promo code for that one, you see it right there, CJCMR30. That's for 30% off new products, 99 cents off .com domains. Promo code there is CJCMR99. And then $1 per month economy hosting with a free domain. Promo code CJCMRFW. All right. Would like to introduce a very exciting app to you. You predict the play and you win, called Fire Fan. Here's our exclusive Fire Fan sports app. Mark Rogers TV offer, promo code you can play. You go on there, you pick your favorite game, and we're talking about real NFL games, college football games, baseball, basketball, whatever your sport. You jump on there, you predict your play, and you play along with the coaches on the sideline, the general manager up in the press box, and your promo code there, you can play. And finally, rep your favorite team in the moment. Brought to you by Breaking Tea, our latest sponsor, courtesy one Nick Dempsey of Conquest Chronicles. We thank Nick for this. We've got our Alabama edition there, Fear the Process. So Alabama fans, you know what that means. Nick Saban, he's all about the process. The process wins. You repeat the process and you win championships. So fear the process. And also Ohio State. Bottom line, the Buckeyes didn't win a conference, didn't win the Big Ten, but They're in. So celebrate Ohio State's entry to the college football playoffs. We're in. That's the T-shirt. And there you see at the bottom, on the lower third at the bottom of the screen there, the URL that you use to go to the website where you can order your Ohio State tee or your Alabama tee. And I'm going to have these available for you on Facebook a little bit later tonight. Once we post the show to Facebook, I'll include those links that you can go straight to the website there. Alabama fans, Ohio State fans, they're very unique T-shirts, and they're hot off the presses. All right, when talking college football, if you want to open up the encyclopedia, and for those of you old enough to remember encyclopedias, that's where we had to go to just cram our heads full of information. This is the guy. When I think college football encyclopedia, this is the guy. Joe Lisi from GoForThe2.com. Joe, can you hear me? Hopefully Joe's on the line with us. Joe's possibly having some technical difficulties. Joe!
I'm right down here. What's up?
Not too much. How you doing, man? It's been a while.
I'm hanging in. Yeah, I'm bunkered down here. What's going on, Mark?
I can see that. You're pulling.
It's a long day. What's going on?
Not too much. We want to talk some college football, and we see that you've gone to great lengths to join us.
Yes, just got in. I'm busy as heck, but I make the time.
Thanks a lot. Man, let's talk about this college football playoff selection. We've got the 4 teams. There was a lot of controversy when we talk about Penn State possibly getting in because of the college football playoff. We're hoping that Joe can hear us right now. If not, I will just ramble to myself and all of you out there because Joe is a guy that is, again, I described him as an encyclopedia. Sometimes I'm described as an encyclopedia, but I defer to this guy, Mr. Joe Lisi. Joe, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mark.
Okay.
I apologize. I just got in the house a little while ago. I do apologize. But, yeah, I can hear you if you can hear me.
No worries, Joe. No worries, Joe, because before we dive into these semifinal matchups, I'd like to get your take on the 4 teams that made it, because Michigan's got a claim, Penn State had a claim, other teams across the country, those 2 in particular, Oklahoma to a certain extent. Did you feel good about the 4 selected?
I do. I mean, when you look at the top 4 teams in the playoff overall, I mean, I don't have a problem with Ohio State getting in over Penn State. For me, I mean, I look at Penn State's 2 losses this year, 42-39 on the road to an unranked Pittsburgh team, and the loss on the road in Ann Arbor where they allowed 336 rushing yards to the Michigan Wolverines. I know both Penn State and Wisconsin were hot teams down the stretch, but for me, both of them did have 2 losses. And when you look at that Ohio State loss on the road in Happy Valley, they dominated for much of the game. And, yeah, Penn State pulled it out. But I think if they both played on a neutral field site, I honestly believe that Penn State would lose that matchup. So don't have a problem with Ohio State sneaking in, on top of the fact that the playoff committee did say that conference championships matter. But when you have 2 lost teams, two-loss teams in the conference championship, it takes away from that championship in my eyes. I mean, that's the only thing that I think you look at. If it was Michigan with a 1 loss, or Ohio State with a 1 loss, or an undefeated team in the conference championship, and Penn State was able to dominate that game and pull out the victory, then I think they're deserving. But I think when you look at their 2 losses in 2016, I think Ohio State did, in fact, deserve the playoff over Penn State.
Joe, you know I'm a guy that likes to survey the teams, look across the conferences, and not be the knee-jerk reaction guy that says, okay, this team's 13-0, they're the best. That's all there is to it. But if you look at the Alabama performance week to week, starting with USC, and it would have been so great to see those 2 teams match up later in the season. I'm not saying USC would have won the game later, but they were just a different team 10 weeks later, as you well know. Is Alabama that much better than everybody else? And if so, or if not, who is the team out there or teams that can compete on the given night?
Yeah, I think Alabama is the best team in the regular season, but do they have defense and offensive weaknesses where they can be defeated on any given Saturday? Yeah. In my opinion, I think there's parity in college football. So, yeah, Alabama is the top team in the country entering the playoff. But are they dominant in the fact that they're just going to walk to the national championship? I don't think so. I think that there's two teams on their schedule in the playoff that can knock off Alabama. And I think one of them happens to be Washington with Jake Browning. I think when you look at the playoff overall, Alabama hitting on all cylinders, won now 13 straight games. They also now have a month and a half layoff. How is that going to affect their team in terms of timing, chemistry? They've done it before, and we just expect Nick Saban to do it. But they do have a freshman quarterback in Jalen Hurts. I think when you look at Washington's defense overall, the one thing that stands out for me, two things. Solid in run support, and they can run sideline to sideline. And their red zone defense has been phenomenal over the last month of the season. You look at that Pac-12 championship game against Colorado. They forced Sefau Lufau into mistakes in the red zone, and the red zone defense against Luke Falk on the road in Pullman really, in my opinion, believes that Washington could challenge Alabama. The other thing, too, is from an offensive perspective, they have two big play wide receivers in John Ross and Dante Pettis that can attack Alabama's secondary vertically. That's the way you neutralize Alabama's speed. It's not running sideline to sideline where that's where their strong suit is in pursuit, running sideline to sideline. So you don't run bubble screens and force them into their strength. You attack that defense head on with seam routes to neutralize the speed of Alabama's defense. And their two big play wide receivers, Dante Pettis and John Ross, can do that. So I think that Washington poses a big threat. The other thing is they force turnovers, plus 21 in turnover margin. So for me, this is one of the top teams in college football in turnover margin. You need to force turnovers on the road or on a neutral field site in the playoffs. So I think Washington poses a great risk to challenge Alabama. And then obviously the other one is Clemson and Deshaun Watson. They have a mobile quarterback in their secondary. You look at their secondary overall, holding opposing offenses to around 50% completion percentage. That's a solid statistic, and third down defense is another phenomenal statistic that both Washington and Clemson possess on the defensive side of the ball. So in my opinion, those are the two teams to challenge Alabama for the title.
So to you, Washington is not just another Michigan State. And if I hear you out, it's because more NFL players on defense, where Michigan State had a stout defense, but wasn't ultra talented. This Washington defense is. I'm hearing 7 NFL players on this defense. Jake Browning's more mobile at quarterback than Connor Cook. And those are two of the big differences, maybe?
Yeah, and then the other is Jalen Hurts is a freshman. Last year, Jake Coker was an experienced senior quarterback that had experience for the most part a little bit at Florida State and then got his feet wet under Lane Kiffin following Blake Sims. So he was a seasoned veteran. To put all this expectation on Jalen Hurts, especially with a month and a half layoff, that's a tough task. I don't care who the quarterback is, let alone a freshman. So I think a lot of people are overlooking that, just expecting Jalen Hurts to hit on all cylinders because he plays for Alabama. I think you got to keep an eye out for that as this game plays out. Jake Browning is a sophomore. Chris Peterson's also a master at formations. So keep that in mind as they play this game in late December, early January.
As you know, Joe, the last time we got a chance to see Ohio State on the same field with Clemson was in the Orange Bowl 3 years ago. It was a highly entertaining game. The Buckeyes had a 9-point lead in the fourth quarter. Philly Brown dropped a punt, and then it came unraveled. Taj Boyd and Sammy Watkins had a field day against the Ohio State defense, which was a bit depleted. No Bradley Roby, no Christian Bryant, Adolphus Washington or Noah Spence out of the game. They missed a number of guys on defense, but it was an entertaining game. Most of those guys have moved on. We're not going to see the same players on the field, but Ohio State and Clemson, this is a marquee matchup with tons of athletes all over the place.
It is, and I think that if you're looking at this game play out, if you're Ohio State, I don't think you want to get into a shootout with Deshaun Watson and the Clemson Tigers. I think you want to play a lower scoring game, even though Ohio State did get into a shootout at the early part of the year with Baker Mayfield in Oklahoma. But honestly, their offense in terms of the vertical passing game was much more cohesive at the early part of the year than it was down the line. I think when you look at this matchup overall, Ohio State has to contain Deshaun Watson in terms of rushing offense. You look at last year, the one thing that allowed Clemson to be so dominant on the offensive side of the ball was their ability to run the football effectively. They had 11 of 15 games where they rushed for over 200 yards of offense. Entering that ACC championship game, they only had 5 games this year where they rushed for over 200 yards of offense, and 2 of those came in the last 2 weeks of the regular season. So I think in order for Clemson to win this ball game, they're going to need Deshaun Watson on the ground. I mean, statistically, last year he had 1,105 rushing yards, averaging 5.5 yards per carry and 12 rushing touchdowns. In the ACC championship game, he entered that matchup rushing for only 444 yards on the ground and 4 touchdowns. That'll put a lot of pressure on the offensive line and, more importantly, Wayne Gallman. So I think that, Clemson needs to run the football, and they have to get up over 200 yards to have that offensive balance. If they become one-dimensional, that'll play right into Ohio State's strength, especially in the back end of the secondary. So I think that's the matchup that you want to see play out. It's a contrast in styles. Whichever team could dictate tempo early will probably win this game, and I think Clemson will favor a higher scoring game to get those wide receivers like Ray McLeod, Mike Williams, and Jordan Leggett involved in the offense early. And I think Gallman will have an impact as well in the short to intermediate passing game. I favor Clemson. I haven't made my selections yet, but I think this game favors Clemson early on. But we'll see how, once I do the research, how it'll play out a little bit later in January.
Yeah, I think this Ohio State defense is tremendous. Top 5 in the nation. Really the only team that found some scoring production for most of the game was Wisconsin, and then the Buckeyes clamped it down in the fourth quarter and in overtime. That was the one offense, and Wisconsin does not have a dynamic offense. Now, Clemson's a whole different deal for Ohio State to deal with when you talk about possibly the best quarterback in the country and a fleet of receivers, as you mentioned, that's pretty much unlike anybody else when you can go 5 or 6 deep. I know Virginia Tech's loaded and some other teams across the country, a wide receiver, Texas A&M, but nothing like Clemson. You alluded to this, Joe, and it surprises me after seeing Ohio State go to Norman and dismantle Oklahoma and Noah Brown have a big game in the passing game and the Buckeyes be able to stretch the field, that after that, and this is surprising from an Ohio State team, and with Urban Meyer recruiting as he does, that really they've got nobody that scares anyone downfield, that blows the top off a defense, that can get separation, not just going downfield, but any kind of separation. The wide receiver play was subpar for an Ohio State, and that really needs to change for them to loosen up this Clemson defense and really have a shot.
Yeah, well, the one thing that Ohio State has done and has continued to do over the last couple of years is force turnovers on the road. I mean, Clemson for the last couple of years now has been right around 2 or 3 positive or negative. Last year when they were in the national championship game, they ended that year at -2. This year they're right around +2. So they're going to need to force turnovers. Whoever wins these games in terms of the college football playoff, because they're played on a neutral field site, the team that wins the turnover battle more times than not will win the football game. You can look at Alabama and Michigan State. They forced Connor Cook into mistakes early, and that translated into points. That's what you need to do in terms of these college football playoff games. The one thing that Ohio State has done this year is force turnovers. They're up there in the top 3rd in college football in terms of turnover margin. As long as they can do that and run the football with Mike Webster and J.T. Barrett, they have a shot. Now, is J.T. Barrett as elusive as Lamar Jackson? No. But he can put pressure on that Clemson perimeter and cause them to second guess and keep them off balance. That's the one thing. It's not so much it's the play calling that they utilize, Mark. They don't have to throw it 100 times per game, but it's when they call passing plays on first and second down, traditionally running plays. If they call them and work off a play action early on running situations, they can have that Clemson defense off balance and then run the football later in that matchup. So it's going to be a very contrast in style. So you don't have to throw it 50, 60 times a game to have offensive success. But if you come out of the gate on running downs and throw the football effectively and force turnovers on the defensive side of the ball, you can control the clock and keep Deshaun Watson off the field. And that's what Ohio State has done in big games. And Urban Meyer, always has his teams mentally prepared. That's the one thing. Ohio State's going into this matchup expecting to win. So is Clemson. One of the best big game head coaches that we've seen in modern day is Dabo Swinney. Doesn't get enough credit for what he's done. He's knocked off teams like Auburn and Notre Dame, and he's knocked off, ACC championships, Ohio State a few years ago, LSU, Oklahoma in back-to-back years. So he's a big game head coach. Both of these teams resemble each other in terms of their mental fortitude. So it's going to be which team could dictate tempo early that'll probably get the victory, and more importantly, can force turnovers on the road.
Joe Lisi's site is goforthe2.com. Joe has been joining me here on Mark Rogers TV for a number of segments going back several years, and Joe's just a great guy. And like I say, encyclopedia when it comes to college football. Joe, I see you all over the place. You're taking pictures with Ron Jaworski and all these celebrities. I'm surprised that you got time for me, but I appreciate
always, Mark. I was in New York yesterday for the College Football Hall of Fame. Great class. Derek Brooks, Troy Davis, Mike Utley, Randall Cunningham. Covered that press conference, went to the dinner at night. Also had the opportunity to interview my good friend Terry Bowden and his whole family, Bobby, Jeff, and Tommy, for a family interview, and Mrs. Bowden as well. It's we put together a 40-minute piece in the Waldorf. Bowden's have a movie coming out on January 8th, so happy to get the exclusive on that, and that'll be coming out within the next couple of days.
Joe, you're all over the place. I know if I try to explain to people where they can find you, find your content, I'm going to miss something. So give us the rundown. Where can we find you?
They can find me on Twitter at GoForThe2. All of my work is available at GoForThe2. That's the number 2.com. Every Saturday morning, they can follow me on SB Nation Radio. I do a 2-hour show with Campus Insiders, Associate Editor Rich Sermonello. That's 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern Time every Saturday. That's SBNationRadio.com or Fantasy Sports Radio Network, FNTSY.com /radio. And then I do a show every Friday in Vegas as well, 7:20 K-Dawn. I'm also on ESPN Radio in Baton Rouge. Each week I'll be breaking down the bowl situation for the upcoming college football season, bowl scenario. So we'll see how it plays out. Keep him busy, my friend.
And we've got to have you on back here to set us up, because in addition to the college football playoffs, which get all the attention, I just love bowl season. I know you do too. And I know it's difficult for the viewers and the listeners to tell this, because I talk about Joe as an encyclopedia, but he actually likes what he's doing too. You actually kind of like college football, don't you?
Yeah, I'm a little bit of a junkie when you say that, Mark. You know that I'm a former ABC Sports college football researcher for the late John Saunders and at the time Terry Bowden. I have about 900 games on tape, media guides. I've been following college football for about 40 years now, so long time.
Joe, we appreciate the time.
40 years, yeah.
And you were great. We need to have you back on. We're going to be diving into bowl games here in the next couple of weeks, so there's a ton of great matchups that I'm looking forward to, and I know you are as well. Joe Lisi from GoForThe2.com. Joe, we appreciate it.
Anytime, Mark. Love the show. Enjoy the week.
Excellent. So, again, college football playoffs get all the attention, but college football junkies, and that's what we are. Looking forward to a ton of bowl games. I can't even get started right now. We will start to dive into it next week. John Baba joining us from Last Word on Sports, another college football junkie. John, we've traded some comments on Twitter and elsewhere on social media, but hey, this is the first chance to get you on Mark Rogers TV, and we appreciate the time, man.
Yeah, pleasure to come on, and you'll look forward to talking about Ohio State and their big game against Clemson in the Fiesta Bowl.
Yeah, we kind of broad stroked it with Joe a little bit because we looked at both matchups, but we'd like to get your take on Ohio State. Know that you follow all of college football, but have certain intimate knowledge of the Buckeyes and your thoughts about this team and their chances against Clemson.
Well, I like their chances a lot. I mean, they're obviously favored in the game. They have so many dynamic playmakers on offense, from J.T. Barrett to Curtis Samuel to Mike Weber. On defense, they have just an unbelievable player, and Malik Hooker. He has I believe he has it's like 6 interceptions, 3 of which have been returned for touchdowns, and he's just spearheaded that defense in terms of like the ability to force turnovers from the opposing team. And as a whole, they have 7 total interceptions returned for touchdowns, which leads college football. So they definitely have the guys on that side of the ball to kind of give Deshaun Watson a lot of trouble. But either way, it's going to be a really fun game, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it pans out.
So we know that they've got the coach that's considered arguably the best, along with Nick Saban. We know that they've got the quarterback in J.T. Barrett that has as much experience, big game experience, as most across the country, and has accomplished so much in the Big Ten, the all-time touchdown leader, breaking Drew Brees' record this year. Elite athletes all over the place, 4- and 5-star guys that probably haven't quite hit their stride. That may come next year, surprisingly, that Ohio State really has this group of players on its roster at its peak in terms of its college play. But the two concerning points of this Ohio State season that we've seen repeated a number of times, John, is wide receiver play that can't blow the top off of a defense, get downfield. Devin Smith, obviously key in that run 2 years ago in defeating Wisconsin, Alabama, and Oregon, that really just made big play after big play. And the offensive line, for me, has been spotty. We didn't know that Penn State was that good when they went to Happy Valley, and that Penn State defensive line that lost all that NFL talent last year just wreaked havoc. Michigan did until the last 2 drives of the game. That Ohio State offense didn't show a pulse, but they've played well when they've needed to, but the offensive line issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest issue coming into this season was just the lack of experience. Just so many guys left for the NFL. You had that bumper crop of NFL draft guys, from Ezekiel Elliott to Taylor Decker. I mean, the list goes on and on. And Ohio State returning just 3 starters on both sides of the ball. And like you said, just a lack of depth in the receiving core. You look at really, I mean, the only 2 guys that provided a lot of yardage and just overall production in the receiving core was Curtis Samuel, who's really more of a hybrid back, and he obviously did a lot in the running game too. I mean, he had 847 rush yards in addition to he had about 1,500 yards total in terms of rushing and passing yards, and then you had Noah Brown. But beyond that, it was a pretty big drop off. You have Dontre Wilson, who maybe was expecting a little bit more out of him, and then KJ Hill, Terry McLaurin, and then in the offensive line, really the only guy that really stood out was Pat Elflein, and he ended up winning the offensive lineman of the year in the Big Ten. But other than that, yeah, there were big issues all around in terms of being able to keep J.T. Barrett upright. They had 25 sacks allowed, which is 59th in FBS. And this could be an issue because, you have a Clemson team that is second nationally in sacks, 46 sacks overall. So Ohio State's offensive line is going to really have their hands full in terms of being able to keep J.T. Barrett upright in this game. But that said, Barrett does, he's a very talented quarterback, he's in terms of just being that dual threat guy that can take the ball and run when he needs to. And though, a lot of people say when you hear dual threat, you think, he can just run the ball, but he's not exactly, the best thrower. But I think with J.T. Barrett and with Deshaun Watson, both of these guys are really good throwing the football in addition to taking it and running if they have to.
John Bava joins us from Last Word on Sports. The folks over there, great to us. Don King, Mike Laval. We've got a lot of friends over there from Last Word on Sports that join us here on Mark Rogers TV on a regular basis. John here for the first time. John, you got to let us know what you're up to these days. What have you written? What do we need to look out for?
Yeah, it's a lot of stuff. I mean, it encompasses not just college football, but I'm the managing editor of Last Word on Pro Football and then Last Word on Soccer. But with college football, I write a weekly column now where we do. It's basically like a pick'em thing where we do a little bit of analysis on like 5 really marquee games on a weekly basis, and then we kind of give predictions. So I'm going to be continuing to be doing that as we get into the bowl season. There's we have 41 bowl games in total, so there's going to be a lot of content. So. On a weekly basis, we'll have, a pick'em article for the first few bowls, and then it'll basically be over the 3 weeks that the bowl season takes place. And then we'll also be, we'll just basically be having previews for all 40 bowls. I'll be contributing to that. And, we got plenty of content coming out, and it's going to be a lot of fun. This is the most wonderful time of the year in more ways than one, and I'm definitely looking forward to it.
No question about it. John, if you're anything like me, you're bragging about that prediction record. Some weeks, other weeks, you don't want anyone to ask.
Yep.
All right, John Bava joins us from Last Word on Sports, breaking down the big semifinal matchup, Clemson and Ohio State. John, we appreciate the time.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for having me on.
All right, this has been another edition of Mark Rogers TV's College Football Coast to Coast. We come your way every Wednesday night. We're available on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, and maybe some platforms to come. And we'll release this as well, recorded on YouTube. And join me at Mark Rogers TV on Facebook as well as Twitter. And you'll see a number of college football releases throughout the week with tons of first-rate bloggers from SB Nation and other sites and contributors in the broadcasting field. So until next week, when we will hit you with a ton of bowl previews because we're just getting started. We will see you next week. We thank you for the time.